Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to chapter 12. We are going to be dealing with groups of microorganisms. Specifically, we are going to start today talking about prokaryotes. Now, if you don't remember what prokaryotes are, that is fine. We are going to discuss what they are as well as all the different groups of them. Okay, so the prokaryote. First off, what you should remember is that prokaryotes are unicellular, which means that they're made out of a single cell. You're not going to find any multicellular prokaryotes. Secondly, they have no internal membranes. So the only membrane that prokaryotes are going to have is around the outside of the cell. Thirdly, prokaryotes have no organelles with membranes. So things like mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, a nuclear membrane, all these things do not exist in a prokaryote. They have to be able to do those activities in a different way. Okay, now the two main types of prokaryotes are called archaea and bacteria. Now, archaea is the one we're going to talk about today. Archaea, the word just means primitive. They get this kind of like old or, what comes first. You use the same root word for archaeology, studying what is primitive or before. Evolutionists believe that the archaea were the ones that were developed first and that the other types of prokaryotes descended from them. They kind of forget the idea, of course, that their archaea are still there. But primarily they're a little bit simpler in structure. Secondly, you have the bacteria, a term which you're more familiar with. The term bacteria just means rod-shaped, kind of like a long stick. This is because the first bacteria that were found were that shape. They aren't all, but we're going to study the different types of bacteria as well. So, archaea. The really cool thing about archaea is where they live. Archaea live in extreme environments, places that you would not be able to expect living things to exist. Okay, the first group of archaea we're going to talk about are the thermophiles. Therm, you're probably remembering, means heat. Philo, remember, means loving, like Philadelphia means the city of brotherly love. Thermophiles, these heat lovers, live in hot environments. Places like deep sea hydrothermal vents where you have the water coming up that's been heated by lava, or in hot springs also heated by lava. Okay, these thermal vents, you can see a picture on the left. These hydrothermal vents, the water coming out of them is about 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Just to give you an idea, that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. The only reason that you don't just have straight on steam and bubbling all through the whole thing is because of the intense pressure that's down at these intense depths. Now, for a long time, nobody thought anything could live down there. There's no sunlight, it's intense pressure. Generally, the water is extremely cold. There's no plants anywhere down there, anything like that. So people assumed that nothing could live down there. Then in 1977, they discovered these thermal vents. And what they realized is that these bacteria, these thermophiles, actually were the bottom of the food web for the living things that were down there. And what you can see is they actually survive by the process of chemosynthesis. Now, chemosynthesis is sort of like photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, the plants will take carbon dioxide and water and make sugar and oxygen. Now, chemosynthesis, these thermophiles will actually take the carbon dioxide and water, but they will also take sulfur, and this hydrogen sulfide actually is what they use for energy for the reactions instead of sunlight. They use chemical energy. That's why it's chemosynthesis. And in the middle of this dark, insanely hot, insanely high pressure environment, these little thermophiles take these substances and they make sugar. And this sugar is then put into these animals, and other animals eat them, and so on, and you end up with this food chain based on these archaea, these thermophiles that live down there. And everything in the area survives off of them. Without them, none of this could survive. And it doesn't show it in the picture, but the number of living things in this environment is crazy. The vents in places are just covered with living things like types of shrimp and lobster and mussels and crabs and all kinds of different creatures that live only in this environment. Now, the second type of archaea we're going to talk about are the methanogens. These are the methane makers. They live in places without oxygen, things like swamps or animal intestines. In fact, in the presence of oxygen, they often will die. So they can't live where there's oxygen. And what they do is they produce methane gas. So that is why when you go into a swamp, it doesn't smell good. It is because it is the same gas given off when someone farts. Your individual body is not actually producing the methane. The bacteria that live in your intestines and help digest your food are what actually are making the methane. Okay? So it's not you, it's them. The third group are the halophiles, which means salt-loving. These bacteria live in places where there is more salt than in the normal oceans. The picture you see on the left is the Dead Sea. Now, that white is not sand, it is not snow, it is salt from where the water is evaporated off. Now, the water, the actual water of the Dead Sea is so salty that you cannot sink. There's just a crazy amount of salt in there. And yet they've recently discovered that there are bacteria living and thriving in the Dead Sea. Now, the picture you see on the right is called Lake Hillier. This is in Australia. It is not a color problem. The lake that you're seeing is actually pink. What's happened is bacteria that live in this highly salty environment, this is as salty if not saltier than the Dead Sea, those bacteria are pink. And this is a place to visit if you want to see something that's a little different. It is in Australia, and you can go visit all those deadly animals. There are other places that have pink lakes, but this one is one of the well-known ones. Now, the last group that we're going to talk about are the acidophiles, the acid-loving archaea. They live in places with extremely acidic water. Now, this is a video about Yellowstone's hot springs, and yet you also need to realize that the chemicals they're giving off, especially the sulfur in them, creates sulfuric acid. So even though the video primarily mentions how hot they are, also realize that besides being that hot, they are also extremely acidic. One moment, please.
Yellowstone has half of all the known geysers in the world, around 300 in all. Here, at the Clepsydra Geyser, cold water flows into tight crevices in Yellowstone's molten core and explodes into steam. Clepsydra's been erupting almost continuously since 1959. Its plumes of water can reach up to 40 feet, making it one of Yellowstone's most reliable and photographed sites. But the meeting of water and hot stone here doesn't always bring such explosive results. Nearby, the calm waters of the Excelsior crater seem to invite the unwary for a swim. But don't be fooled. That beautiful blue color means the water is so hot, not even the hardiest bacteria can survive. This same deadly blue lies at the center of what is, without doubt, one of nature's most amazing sights. A place that alone lures thousands of people from around the world to Yellowstone. It's known as the Grand Prismatic Spring. This is the largest hot spring in the U.S. and the third largest in the world. Its blue core may be deadly, but the colorful cooler bands at its edges are evidence the Grand Prismatic is also home to plenty of life. Each band supports a unique bacteria or algae that creates a color of its own. When visitors on the boardwalk of the Grand Prismatic cross patterns that look like giant flames, they are stepping over descendants of some of the earliest forms of life on Earth. These microbes, called thermophiles or heat lovers, thrive in extreme environments like the waters of Grand Prismatic Spring. There are literally billions of these tiny orange-colored microbes here. So many, they create dramatic flame-like patterns that look like a work of art that was painted by Mother Nature herself. Getting a chance to experience this colorful, steaming cauldron is why many come to Yellowstone in the first place. But there's nothing like seeing it all from the air.